That had better be the sex robot Sandman was supposed to send me 4 months ago. Justice? Cuspy? What are you doing violating my restraining order?
Dall, we've got some nice, juicy material here for you.
Oh, okay, well I guess that supersedes legal authority.
Joke's on you, I don't know jack about legal authority.
Want to hear about how we got it?
I really don't care.
We went all across
okay. I'll go
Hyrule,
fuck
fighting
myself.
the goblins as far as we could until we ended up on the terrain of Testament. And it was there that we had to battle a 5-headed beast, and all 5 heads were Sonic memes. And finally, we had to endure all the live-action Alvin and the Chipmunks movies. It was then they gave us a Lily Peet video as material. I'd cover it, but I don't want to hold it out until next Halloween.
If your reward for besting a meme was a Lily Peet video, then you are the worst dungeon crawlers in existence.
Also, I didn't want to cover it because I don't have the sanity to go near a Lily Peet video.
So you went to the person who doesn't value their sanity at all?
Well, I mean, it made sense at the time.
Well, when I say it out loud, it doesn't sound that crazy, actually. Now get the fuck out of my house.
Yeah, I don't care anymore. My feet are tired and I am not taking this home with me. Here.
Hi-ho, Justice! Away!
Fucking hell, I think a letter would have sufficed. Then again, I don't really check my mail that much just because it's filled with overdue bill. Wait, how do those fuckers get past the minefield? I'm not gonna lie, this video got on my nerves more than anything else I've covered so far. Just the sheer execution of this chain, where it spawned from, and why it exists just bothers me. So we're covering a video called Violence is Golden by Lily Peet, which essentially stemmed from a video called Guard Break. There was admittedly a lot of stuff said in that video, though the core of it was focused on bullying, comparing the situation Rainbow Dash experienced in an episode of MLP to the military, and explaining why the resolution of this episode was poor. This video actually did bring up some solid points when it came to the topic of bullying, though there were still plenty of issues with that video, enough to be addressed by Josh Scorcher and a couple of friends of his. If you haven't seen that video, I do suggest doing so, since it does address some of Lily's arguments that were entirely directed at him, among many other things. This would have been a double feature had Josh's video not addressed every single one of my qualms better than I could. However, there is still one part of the video that I do want to address. The point being that the video we're covering right now stems from Guard Break, and directly addressing some of the backlash she received from that video. In fact, why don't we play the clip that got under people's skin?
Telling children to ignore it is to teach them to be complacent, not just of their own bullies, but of others. It tacitly gives bullies free reign to do whatever they please because they won't see any consequences because nobody gives a shit. And that attitude can fuck off and die in a ditch along with the malignant human cancer that defend it. If you're a child watching this right now and you're being bullied in school, here's what you do. You demand that your bully cease their behavior, and if they refuse, grab the heaviest object you can reliably swing and beat their fucking teeth in. Yeah, you'll get suspended, but that suspension will end, and that bully will never bother you again because of how much that beating actually hurt.
I left in a good portion of that for context because it will be important later. In fact, keep everything you just heard in the back of your head. Since all the prefacing is done now, I'm gonna skip to about 50 seconds in, since the first portion explains the controversy, how she's called violence for certain solutions in other respects, and then lists some examples. So we're just gonna start with her talking about Avatar: The Last Airbender?
When I think about violence as a story concept as well as a moral concept, my mind always comes back to The Last Airbender. In the final few episodes, Aang is caught with a moral dilemma. As an airbender, he swore an oath never to take a life, but leaving Fire Lord Ozai alive is practically begging for another war to start. Aang goes to seek the wisdom of previous avatars, all of which tell him that they were just as hesitant as him, and it was catastrophic. In a last-ditch effort, Aang contacts an air nomad, Avatar Yang Chen, in the hopes of getting the affirmation he desires. Instead, Yang Chen tells him that his insistence on sticking to his air nomad principles while the world continues to burn around him is selfish, and that as the Avatar, he needs to let go of his pride. Watching this, I was on the edge of my seat because it was the first time that the series had introduced a genuine moral dilemma. Does Aang do the quote-unquote right thing and let the world continue to suffer, or does he kill the Fire Lord and end the 100-year war? And he likely wasn't going to come out of this feeling all good and happy about himself, and the knowledge that he'd killed the Fire Lord would have haunted him for the rest of his life. For a few brief moments, Avatar had gone from being a great show to the greatest show ever made. And then they ruined it. In a move that was rather prophetic in hindsight, Aang learns how to take away someone's bending and depowers the Fire Lord, and all that valuable writing with the spirits of the previous avatars was just pissed away. Aang was presented with a genuine moral dilemma and found a way to back out of it at the last second, and completely spoiled what could have been a really interesting conclusion to his character arc. The transformation of a moral choice into a choice about selfishness versus the welfare of others meant nothing because we could have an all-around happy ending anyway.
I do realize that plenty of people found Aang's final actions decision to stop Ozai to be a bit of a cop-out move, though this takes it a bit of a step further. In any instance, you would be right, Lily. Since all of the previous avatars didn't have this miraculous third option, they would have to resort to whatever end justified their means. Though I do have something to show. Doug Walker and Dante Bosco's explanation of this scene in the Nostalgia Critics Top 11 Best Avatar episodes.
Some also take issue that Aang's defeat of the Fire Lord is a bit of a deus ex machina and didn't teach any tactical lessons.
But the show is not just about teaching morals, it's about spiritual understanding. Reinforcing a philosophy that as bad as things get, even over a long period of time, balance will eventually take shape again.
Aang's choice does almost consume him, and in the end, he had to find another route that nobody thought possible. He crossed over and created an alternative that wasn't even on the table, as if the world was so out of balance that this was inevitable.
Just as was said here, Aang was prepared to kill Ozai in that fight, but chose the alternative instead. And instead of energy bending existing for Aang to be given a simple outing, it's a spiritual awakening and cleansing for the Avatar world, finally creating balance after a century of turmoil and hopelessness. It was meant to strengthen a philosophy. In a real-world situation, no, this alternative would not exist, and Aang would still be pressed with the dichotomy of killing Ozai or sticking with his principles. But the thing about that was, Aang still found a third solution. There wasn't just two options left on the table, he was able to find a third option, which is going to be a running theme throughout the rest of your video.
What makes Avatar stick out is that this dilemma was actually interesting. You know how games like Undertale or Dragon Age keep pushing the your choices affect the world concept, but your choices only ever really amount to be nice to people or murder everything? How the evil options in these sort of games amounts to little more than just killing people for giggles? You remember how Fallout 3's big moral decision was, do you want to kill a whole town of people or not? I don't know anyone who actually did blow up Megaton because you were never given an adequate reason as to why it needed to be destroyed. And that's in a game made for adults where you can be more direct in what the problems with that world are.
So I was originally going to skip over this part, but SketchTV left me a note in while he was reading over my script and I just could not let it go, so I'm going to read it out in full for you. But in games like Undertale, there's some other things in there like doing kind acts, such as having part of a snowman, being the carrot, to be taken around the world with you to let them partly experience the world, or you can eat it, or you can end up not doing it, in turn crushing their dreams. With this, it isn't a kill or be killed idea. Also, there's you spending time with Swasabuk doing stuff with them and for them. Then of course there's you going on the date with Papyrus or not, and there's also you helping Temmie out with some things. Did she even play the game, or did she think that it's just do this equals bad and do this equals good no matter what because violence and death? There's also various incidents with side quests as well within Fallout 3 where you can end up basically telling a kid to run away from home or stay around as an example if your speechcraft is high enough. Like legit, I understand that these games have core moral of the story type stuff, but the thing is that the entire series of both main examples being Undertale and Fallout doesn't even get to be applied to what Lily is even talking about. I probably could not have worded that better than him, unfortunately, but I'm glad he put it in there anyway. Also, hashtag not a side guy.
It's a common sentiment among most people that violence is never the answer, a sentiment only reinforced by lazy writing where the violent options are either never justified or completely unnecessary. However, reality never quite works out that way, and this kind of narrative instills a false sense of what's moral in a lot of people. Violence is the worst thing in the world, we say, and yet we celebrate people whose job involves violence and never question the dissonance. We take great glee in violence as a form of cathartic entertainment in stories where violence literally solves all our problems, but suddenly get very skittish when someone suggests approaching a problem the same way in real life. Neo-Nazis can assault, murder, and terrorize people with very little worthwhile criticism, but the moment people start fighting back, we've got all sorts of hand-wringing about stooping to their level.
First of all, where the fuck have you been all this time when people were criticizing the military consistently? I mean, sure, people praise the US military constantly, and not doing so can be seen as unpatriotic, though as of late, the military has not been without its fair share of criticisms, especially individual soldiers who fought in the war. See the anti-war protests and people who cry out to stop supporting the troops.
You know, when you agree to kill strangers for money, there's a word for that. It's called a hitman, and I don't think hitmen are a very good thing. I don't think hitmen make good role models. So why the hell would I support people who I think have made a poor life decision to join the military, and who I think many of them are dickheads, okay? I don't.
And as for the bit about television, I wouldn't consider that a fair comparison. Sure, plenty of us do sit down and watch shows to see action and conflict, though there's quite a difference between reality and fantasy. Watching people duke it out to save the world is quite different than getting in a scuffle with someone on the street, or even just getting into a fight at school. By watching something like Dragon Ball Z, that's not an active support of violence, since that's purely a work of fiction that we can sit down and enjoy for being what it is, presenting us with a story that we can immerse ourselves within. The end result of an episode of your favorite anime will not work out the same way in a real-life scenario, and it's unrealistic to assume so, especially without knowing the full situation at hand. And as for that last point, well, once again, this is just assuming people are fine with neo-Nazis doing this in the first place. This wasn't the discussion at hand. Plenty of people were already against what these people do and what they support. No one was advocating for them to assault or terrorize anyone, simply just letting them have the right to their opinion. I can't speak for every scenario, but we can pull up the Richard Spencer situation because that's the one I'm most familiar with. While I won't say whether or not anyone stooped to their level, I'd rather not open up that can of worms by giving my take on it. The only reason people opposed it is because simply assaulting someone you disagree with, in their opinion, doesn't make you better than them. The way they see it, if people are lashing out because of their own anger, you're doing the same thing and you're not making yourself look better. The narrative was never in support of the neo-Nazis or the alt-right members doing what they did. Just assaulting them without them provoking you is not much better than what they do, and that doesn't help the situation in any way.
10 million points for Griffin Puff!
Likewise with bullying. When the vast majority of schools showcase that they'd rather sweep the issue of bullying under the rug and refuse to address it in any meaningful way, what the hell are these kids supposed to do? What possible reason is there to give that they shouldn't beat their tormentors into the dirt? Because it's wrong? I mean, that's the reason. Because it's wrong. Assault is certainly illegal, except in situations of self-defense, and we've all been taught that diplomacy is a morally superior option to physical force. Sure, it's morally wrong. It's not exactly an argument that speaks to the value of being on the moral high ground, though, does it? It doesn't sell me on anything. If you have an alternative solution, I'd love to hear it. Problem is, a lot of people don't. Whenever it's suggested that children deal with their bullies by getting physical, social media is full of cries of violence only begets more violence, and other similar platitudes that are easy to make when you're sat comfortably at home, privileged to not have to be around these kind of cretins. But whenever I ask them if they have a better idea, guess what I get? More platitudes, more vagary, no concrete practical solutions that would work better than just clobbering someone in the head. That's not selling me on anything, that's just appealing to morality. And it's conservatives appealing to morality too, which is fucking rich.
Conservatives are evil. Classic schmosby.
Classic Schmosby!
I guess the biggest problem I'm seeing so far is that you've simply presented us with a scenario where apparently the issue of bullying is just being swept under the rug. Now creating this dichotomy of diplomacy or just outright beating the source of your problem with a giant object. The setup is completely absurd considering how many details are completely absent from the scenario. And sure, from the masses we aren't seeing quite as many compelling arguments, but even then, what they're saying isn't wrong. As much as I agree with self-defense being fine and how violence should be a last resort, how does your previous scenario reflect this? You're telling kids that bullying should simply be solved by a violent outburst the second diplomacy doesn't work. I'll say right now, I know you're about to express why the solution doesn't always work. However, the narrative you presented us as to why to use this solution is extremely flawed as well. It's completely based on this weird bit of conjecture that you pulled out of your ass in regards to ignoring the problem never working, and supposedly because no adult actually gives a shit about solving the problem. While these cases do exist, how you came to this concrete conclusion I will never know, and how this apparently can be applied to any scenario is beyond me, especially since you should reasonably be smart enough not to pull this sort of disingenuous nonsense. And as far as your reasoning for why your solution works better, it'll apparently stop the bully from messing with you and your school suspension will eventually end. Well, unless it's an act of self-defense, then you're just bashing someone's face in for making fun of you or just being an ass. That action can go as far as being expelled from school over just a suspension in certain cases. And sure, you could just go to another school or go to some second chance type place, but bouncing around from school to school because your best possible solution to bullying is to beat the shit out of the perpetrators is not good advice, Lily. And even in the case of a suspension being the only punishment, not everyone is just fine with the suspension. You are fine with it. Some other people simply won't accept it as easily as you though. That's just not an option for them. And on the subject of just fighting back in general, this is completely ignoring the fact that in many instances of bullying, the victims simply can't fight back. They're not capable of it, which goes back to my statement on how there are tons of factors being left out. Part of bullying also involves the bully showing how socially superior they are to you. Fear is a tool, and with the right target, this puts the victim in a position of powerlessness. They can't fight back. This is just focusing on an instance of one bully and one victim though. Increase the amount of bullies in the scenario and we have an even stronger case to make for why fighting back won't work in every instance. Now, I realize in a moment you do admit that this solution won't work all the time, and you're right, but even so, this solution just doesn't always exist for the victims. And that's even ignoring the victims that suffer from anxiety and depression and why they've been pushed to the point where they cannot fight back. So as I said, this narrative is just very flimsy.
There was even more sentiment about how clobbering your bullies would lead them to bringing their friends to beat you up in return, and no, it won't. Maybe 1 in 100 will. I'm not saying that this is a perfect solution, it doesn't work all the time, but the vast majority of bullies, both young and old, historically look for easy targets. It's why schoolyard bullies always go after the small kid. It's why children on Tumblr are a conservative's favorite scapegoat, because it's easy and requires little effort. When their victims fight back, they don't fight back harder, they go and find a different victim and the cycle begins anew. If there was ever a word to describe bullies, coward would certainly be it. All of the supposed non-violent solutions to bullying rely on people in authority stepping in and intervening, and any victim of bullying will tell you that teachers and parents have historically never given a shit, and you're given solutions that don't actually address the problem. Just ignore it and let the person making your life miserable run around unchecked.
Absolutely not. After doing maybe 30 minutes of searching, I found a lot of different solutions to bullying that don't just resort to getting adults involved, though I'd like to tackle that first. Historically, I'm not gonna pretend like this doesn't happen. I know there are teachers and parents who just don't always handle these situations well at all. The bullies' parents that will insist that their kids aren't capable of being bullies, the teachers that just don't care, all that kind of stuff. I know that happens. Though there are solutions to that as well. If a teacher or even a principal isn't getting involved, then report it to a superintendent or some higher authority until you get the authority figure that will take action. That's what they're there for if all else fails. It's their job to make sure their staff is doing what they're supposed to be doing. Though regardless of that, if you're truly trying to give advice, this is just awful. If the solution can be solved by a staff member just getting parents involved, that is still an option to consider. Now, as for those other solutions, well, plenty of them are quite simple, and I found a post that I'll link in the description that puts it best, though I'm gonna be reading quite a lot of it. To be honest, the only experiences I've had with bullies have been minor and temporary, but I believe the use violence and ignored answers people usually give are overly simplistic. Here is my take. The main reason someone will bully you is to get you to demonstrate in front of others that they outrank you socially. Whatever you do in response to their actions must reflect the fact that you don't believe they have higher status than you, and you don't care what they think of you. Plenty of people will tell you to fight bullies. Sometimes that works, but sometimes it's really stupid. If a bully fights better than you and wants to fight, then you may just give them the opportunity to show that they are stronger than you, and so further enhance their status. If you escalate things too far, then things can get nasty and people will get hurt. There is a lot to be said for learning a martial art. Even if you don't fight people, just the fact that you know how to fight will mean that you will have calmer body language if violence is being threatened, which will make it harder for others to assert status over you. If a bully wants you to fight them, then either backing down or fighting them will accept their frame of being superior, provoking a fight. Instead, say something that suggests that you don't believe fighting will establish social dominance, such as, "That's not my thing, you know," or "I'm sure you'd kick my arse, I hear you fight a lot." Walk away in disdain rather than fear. Sometimes you do need to use a little violence, but never escalate it beyond the level that they deserve given their behavior towards you. Any violence should come from the mindset of a superior administering a punishment towards a badly behaved junior, and not that of a scared junior lashing out at an attack. Nothing says high status quite so much as sticking up for other people. If a bully is bullying you, then chances are they're bullying someone else too. If you see a bully picking on someone, then confront them and calmly tell them that their behavior is out of line. Confronting someone for being mean to you can run the risk of looking like they've got to you, but confronting them about their treatment of others is clear assertion of authority. Now, just like every issue, these are not instantly going to solve every issue that victims might have, but having all these solutions helps. since if one doesn't work, try the next. And one might come back to when I said that victims are not entirely capable of standing up for themselves or just doing any of these things. There are some solutions to that as well. Travel with a group of friends or people you trust, decreasing the chances of the bully finding time to get alone time with you. In your spare time, try your best to build confidence as well, since that will help ease you into these other solutions. Learning a martial art should help you as well, and that should help increase your confidence and give you some leg up over the bully if a confrontation occurs. And I know Lily isn't going to like hearing this, but ignoring the problem is also a solid solution at times, or at least pretending like you're ignoring it. By ignoring what they say, you're not giving them a negative reaction to their words, you're not even acknowledging it. Again, this doesn't always work, and I know that, but the conversation is on bullies in general. I've tried this and it has worked in some instances, others not so much. But that's why I'm giving all of these solutions, because there's not just one or two single solutions. A portion of the article that I didn't read over does have a solution for this last one though. If you're feeling confident enough when a bully tries to make fun of you, simply respond in a way that implies that what they said is beneath you, or pretend it's just a joke. Show them that you aren't beneath them and that their superiority is superficial and fragile. Though, just like the last solution, it doesn't always work. But the option always exists if all else fails. I don't know if any of these can be classified as a third or fourth or more options outside of the main discussion being had in this video, but I feel as if they're some of the best possible solutions over just mindlessly beating someone because they refuse to leave you alone.
Remember how Avatar Yang Chen chastised Aang for putting his selfish moralizing above the needs of others? That's exactly what's going on here. It's easy to sit back and repeat an empty phrase like violence only begets more violence when you don't have to confront things like bullying, when it's all safely behind you and you've forgotten the damage it can deal. It's easy because it takes no effort and you get the selfish satisfaction of appealing more virtuous. It's like saying you don't filter comments because you believe in free speech. Do you really? Or are you just lazy and don't give a shit? I promise you, if by default you had to manually approve every comment on a YouTube video, most people wouldn't bother. But being honest about that fact doesn't give you the same smug self-satisfaction as declaring yourself a believer of a law you have absolutely zero effect on.
But Aang was directly facing these issues head on. Nothing was behind Aang. That was the whole point of him trying to find the solution, so he could save lives without directly killing the Fire Lord. While it did seem unrealistic, Aang was feeling the problems firsthand because this was his quest. He needs to fix his mistakes for leaving the world, but he also has to solve a century's worth of problems. This is a little different considering he has to shoulder nearly all of the world's problems. But even then, what's with this accusation to begin with? These phrases don't exist to be used in a moral circle jerk session. Sure, maybe just saying violence begets violence alone doesn't exactly have the most amount of insight, though again, this is all in response to such a drastic measure that really doesn't need that much escalation. And who's to fucking say that they don't understand what bullying is like? Hell, I went to school in Santa Rosa. That place would make a school shooter blush and make a fist fight look like a civil debate hosted on PBS. Plenty of other people likely had to deal with the same thing, and in other people's experience, violence may not have been the solution. It wasn't for me, and it wasn't for them. When people pass this advice along, and in this case of a screenshot that you showed, explain why they disagree with you, they're not doing this for their own self-satisfaction. It's quite a dismissive and undeserving notion to assume.
10 million points for Griffin Puff!
As someone who would rather find solutions to problems, I don't have time for that sanctimonious shit. I don't really care if some paint-drinking moron thinks that I'm becoming just as bad as the bullies. Despite what your favorite Batman quote would like to tell you, someone who kills a killer does not suddenly become a killer in return. We have the police and the military whose literal taxpayer-funded job is to kill killers. Do you look on them as being just as bad as the mafia or ISIS? Of course you fucking don't. Because violence only begets more violence is a knee-jerk phrase that people spit out without thinking because it sounds correct. It is not, however, actually right. The world just isn't that simple, and stripping the nuance out of a situation to boil it down to a simple light side or dark side decision is fundamentally stupid. The vast majority of times, bullies are deterred when you hurt them. The US Army isn't going to talk ISIS down from the mountain like the starlight glimmer. You're not going to suddenly discover energy bending. And if you're someone who ignores these problems because you're more concerned with sounding virtuous and not actually offering a worthwhile solution, then kindly fuck yourself off the nearest pier. Nobody has time for your selfish, sanctimonious crap. Help contribute to a real solution or go sulk in the corner while the grown-ups do the real work.
I feel like saying the vast majority of times is not an accurate representation of the issue, though when your narrative is this condensed and deconstructs almost every other solution, then I'd be pressed to find any other alternative, though this clip is a pretty nice way to segue into my final thoughts. Outside of the jabs and attitude that you portrayed in Guard Break, I feel like your points on bullying in that video were well thought out, and it disappoints me that this video didn't offer any further insight, which is ironically what you're accusing everyone else of doing. Despite complaining how no one else is providing any alternatives, the possible alternatives that you address were purely written off as not working because adults don't give a shit or ignorance is complacency, and your narrative is so situational, so skewed and purely based on your own conjecture to the point that I can't reasonably find another alternative that would even be acceptable. You've rigged the game, so to speak, and the Avatar comparison didn't quite help since they didn't mesh with your arguments quite as well as you would have hoped, since just like the dichotomy in Avatar, there were more options that existed, Aang simply just had to look hard to find them. I guess if I could extend some compliments your way, you did manage to keep my attention throughout this video. Despite what you say to be very flawed, your way of speaking and your presentation are enough to actually keep me invested in watching. Your editing is nice, and by all accounts, you have the mark of a solid YouTuber technical-wise. I don't know if I'd say that I hate you, Lily. I certainly don't like you, and the things you say really do put me off. But I didn't want to go into this just being an asshole because Lily Peet is Lily Peet, and everyone hates her, so I don't need to try. I don't even know if you'll take any of this into consideration, but I don't want to sit by and let it slide, so please don't take this as an attack, because that's the last thing I want to be doing. And after about 7 hours of scripting this and a mild migraine, I think I can close this chapter and just finally move on.
Lily Pete? More like Lily Pizza.